Thank you very much for that introduction. All protocols observed. Good morning, everyone. It is indeed my distinct pleasure to be here this morning, and I'm truly honored to have been invited by the FID to be the keynote speaker this morning. It is indeed a distinct privilege to address you. And I'd like to take this opportunity to congratulate the FID today on their 20th anniversary, and also in that regard, to congratulate them too for the many successes that they have had over the last 20 years. It's impressive, and I know that with increased partnership, increased collaboration, both with domestic and international partners, we will only see their success increase. And this will be to the benefit of all of Jamaica as we see a reduction in crime. So this morning, I'd like to speak to you a little on bridging the divide, finding effective ways in which we can collaborate and cooperate in the quest to counter money laundering and all other forms of financial crime in Jamaica. And so it may be trite, but I like to define terms. And so we think of cooperation and collaboration every day. And is it the same thing? Well, when we cooperate, we tend to cooperate where we're pursuing our own goals. When we collaborate, we're tending to pursue shared goals. So what is the common objective? What are our common goals as partners, present, and those that we wish to gain? We all want to see a reduction of financial crime. And so it's important that we foster cooperation and collaboration between the public sector, the private sector, and amongst them at every stage of the process. And if we do that, then this won't just be a dream, but these objectives will be attained. So, we want to work together at every step of the process. And of course, the starting point is always the passage of legislation. And it was heartening to hear ministers talk this morning about, collaboration between themselves, the government, and the opposition to ensure that requisite legal reform is attained. But we need stakeholders working together in the enforcement of legislation as well, right? Not just the passage of legislation, but the enforcement. This is to ensure that our common objective is attained. And so we need to work together for gathering information, analyzing data, investigating, prosecuting, and of course, asset recovery. But what happens? What stops us? Well, it's the silo mentality, isn't it? We tend to all work in our own little spheres and not want to reach out and collaborate and cooperate. So we exist in information silos, each of us acquiring our own data, our own information, and having all of these tools available to us. But if we only reached out with partners, then together, all of these stakeholders working together can use all of that information in a far more strategic way, one in which, again, we can pursue our common objective. And so, let's talk about the power of partnership. Partnerships encourage this common purpose based on shared interest approach. It helps us to develop healthy collaborative relationships. And it has been said that the most underutilized asset of those involved in detecting and fighting financial crime is the ability to link up in true and substantive partnerships. So we're talking about real partnerships, not just announcing, oh, we're partnering with so-and-so and having a nice photo op. We're talking about really getting together working in a meaningful manner. And so I want to call this the triple P strategy. And triple P is not just about a public-private partnership, which is the most common one, and certainly one we will discuss further, but also there can be private-private partnerships as well as public-public partnerships. And we'll talk a little bit more about those. So, public-private partnership. Here, we're going to focus on a partnership between public entities, things like the FIU or the law enforcement agencies, regulators, of course, and members of the private sector, particularly the regulated sector, financial institutions, DNFIs. But we could also expand this to include other important entities, such as NGOs, academics, or the think tanks. All of these entities and individuals can play a critical role in public-private partnerships. And I want to make a distinction in terms of partnerships between those that are strategic-based and those that are operational. So you may have a partnership that is established for the purpose of exchanging strategic information only. Then there are others that are for the purpose of sharing operational information. So the purpose of a strategic partnership is really to increase an understanding of the risks and the threats, to enable reporting entities to what is said, to calibrate their detection system so that they can more effectively detect and deal with money laundering, terrorist financing, and other predicate offenses. This can result in the exchange of sanitized information on money laundering trends, typologies, patterns, and so on. It can help these reporting entities to improve the quality of their suspicion reporting. It can help them to develop more red flags and risk indicators, help in terms of improving data analysis, preparing guidelines, proposing legislative changes, and indeed even organizing training events. And so the outcome of many of these strategic partnerships, if you have one, for instance, with the FIU, is you can have feedback that is specific as relates to specific reports. You can have general feedback to a particular institution on whether they are missing red flags and so on. You can have more general feedback that relates to quality of reports coming from a particular sector or all the sectors. And this feedback can be given via many different sources, including reports or sessions such as these, conferences, meetings with particular sectors, and so on. And what are the benefits of strategic feedback? It allows the FIU and reporting entities to develop more detailed risk typologies, allowing them to improve their awareness of new techniques and emerging threats. It helps with risk mitigation by the rapid sharing of red flags and indicators. Reporting entities can find that proverbial needle in the haystack more swiftly and submit more targeted and better quality STRs. It allows them to improve the quality of the analysis, and that in turn will help the FIU, FID in this case, to focus their resources and allow them to, the reduction of false positives, so to speak, so that the FIU is not overwhelmed and using information that is of limited value. It also helps reporting entities by having a better risk understanding to not de-risk certain customers which they mistakenly think are high risk. Operational partnerships now more focus on agreements between the private sector law enforcement FIUs, where you share operational data on specific persons, transactions, and cases. And the whole idea is to trigger monitoring of the financial conduct of persons of interest in order to enable that reporting entity to search their records in a targeted way. The FIU may provide reporting entities with specific information related to targeted SDRs. And this would enable the reporting entity to provide profiles of relevant offenders or information about particular suspects. And the exchange of this type of information also allows law enforcement to cross-match financial and other information to create a more accurate and targeted intelligence picture. So again, what are the benefits of these types of operational partnerships? It enables the FIU to better monitor the activities of targets, allows the mapping of criminal networks. They can get leads in criminal investigations. They can identify and monitor transactions of persons of interest even before an investigation. And it therefore helps to improve reporting entities, CDD, by providing feedback on the outcome of particular SDRs. An example, I'm going to give you a few examples of these types of partnerships from around the world. One of the popular ones is that of Fintel Alliance in Australia. And this was established in 2017. And one of the critical things about this particular alliance is that they have two, what they call hubs. One is the operations hub, which provides a physical space where partners from both the private and the public sector can actually physically stay and analyze and intelligence, exchange information in close to real time, and with the benefit of certain tracking tools and methodologies. They also provide what is called the Innovations Hub. And here, partners actually co-design, test new and innovative technology that can help with gathering and analyzing financial intelligence. And so we can see that this type of partnership between law enforcement and the private sector, bringing together people in one space to work on this together, can be highly beneficial. We have some other examples. One in Germany. Again, this one, you can see, consists of 36 members, including 19 financial institutions, as well as the financial regulator, the FIU, the local police. And this one operates more for the purpose of exchanging strategic information, whereas the counterpart in the Netherlands focuses more on operational information. And this is in regards to sharing specific police data. Now, in the UK, there is, I think, the best example of this sort of partnership in the form of the Joint Money Laundering Intelligence Task Force, which was set up in 2015. Now, this partnership between law enforcement and the financial sector for the purpose of exchanging and analyzing data related to money laundering and wider economic threats is impressive in that it comprises at least 40 financial institutions, the financial regulators. It comprises also of law enforcement agencies and the FIU. So you can see how beneficial all of these persons partnering together in the pursuit of this common objective can be. Now, in some jurisdictions, such as Ireland, for instance, they have more sector-specific partnerships. For instance, there's one that was set up between the FIU and the banking sector, another one with accountants, and yet another one with members of fintech. You can also have, coming out of these partnerships, resource clusters. And this allows for the joint pooling of assets and resources and capacity building and training in critical areas that will enable more strategic use of technology, data analysis, in order to produce more actionable intelligence. And so this is something that I think is commendable and something that can be considered. So what are the benefits of these public-private partnerships? We see improved cooperation between the private sector and the FIUs and other competent authorities. We get a better understanding of the needs of the FIU, their expectations, increased capabilities to prioritize threats, pool resources, improved awareness of trends, and importantly, more effective, targeted, and efficient action to prevent, detect, and combat threats. Also, improvement in the quality and the number of STRs is, of course, beneficial and a significant benefit of this type of partnership. But what are the benefits to the private sector? Why would they care? Why would they want to join such a partnership? Well, sometimes self-interest trumps altruism. And it's part of their need to survive, their own self-preservation. If they've developed better compliance tools and they are less likely to be implicated in any kind of financial crime, as we can tell now, they avoid major reputational damage. And this is significant for those, particularly in the banking sector, who have to maintain a correspondent banking relationship, because then they avoid the risk of de-risking, and are able to stay connected to the international trade, investment, and of course, maintain the confidence of their clientele. So, those were public-private partnerships. What about public-public partnerships? We're talking here about arrangements amongst public sector bodies for the purpose of cooperating and collaborating. And so you may include here domestic law enforcement agents, FIUs, tax authorities, customs, prosecutors, and other government entities. And we heard from this morning that the FIU, for instance, has MOUs with other domestic agents in Jamaica, including the Integrity Commission. And these are just examples of public-public partnerships. Now, we have NAMLAC, the National Anti-Money Laundering Committee. Now, this represents an actual basis on which these sort of public-public partnerships can be formed, given its composition, comprising many members of the public sector. But it's also worthy of consideration that this entity could be expanded to include membership from the private sector. And this way we could provide critical partnership opportunities somewhere along the line of the GMLIT in the UK. And I think if we were to pattern NAMLIC along the lines of GMLIT, then we could see a benefit to these sort of partnerships, both in terms of public-public and public-private partnerships. So that's just food for thought. What about private-private partnerships? Now here we're talking about arrangements amongst various members of the private sector with the aim of collaborating and cooperating in AML. Now some of the considerations for private-private partnerships might relate to legislative impediments, prohibiting them from sharing information between themselves. For instance, can one bank share confidential information with another? You have to consider data protection legislation and so on. You also have to consider issues of security. Now, there are various types of encryption mechanisms. One that I read about, privacy-enhancing technologies. This would enable, for instance, financial institutions to verify encrypted data of another financial institution and using encryption and zero-knowledge proof technologies to verify certain types of information without compromising the security or confidentiality of the underlying data. So these are just some of the considerations that will have to be taken into account if you wanted a situation where you could have further private partnerships with members of the private sector, financial institutions, for instance, sharing information with their counterparts. And another good example of a private-private partnership comes from the UK, and that is in the form of the Joint Money Laundering Steering Group. Now, this is a private sector body that is made up of leading UK trade associations in the financial services industry. And you can see from the list how impressive it is, all of these various associations. Now, their aim is really to operate like a think tank and to provide strategic information to each other in the form of offering practical assistance, as well as, most importantly, the creation and promulgation of industry guides for money laundering. Another thing that I think we could pattern and without too much difficulty. There's also something to consider, and that's in terms of the SWIFT KYC registry. This is a secure global platform for KYC data that is available to correspondent banks, non-bank institutions, and corporates. What the benefit of signing on to this registry is that participants get to align with global best practices in KYC, demonstrate transparency, but most importantly, reduce their due diligence costs and protect their correspondent banking relationships. Now, as we all know, much of the crime that we speak about is transnational. And so what we spoke about just now, the SWIFT KYC registry, is an example of transnational partnership. But we need to build on these types of transnational partnerships to bring together stakeholders from multiple countries to give them a better understanding of cross-border risks. This improves the ability to detect cross-border suspicious activity in a more effective, strategic, and targeted way. An example of a cross-border partnership is Europol's Financial Intelligence Public-Private Partnership that was launched in 2017. And this is a transnational information sharing mechanism. And if you note the number of members and observers, it comprises almost 30 competent authorities, a number of financial institutions, public-private partnerships, even international organizations. But importantly, it also includes regulators and members of think tanks and academia. And so this environment is well suited to provide an operational and strategic information sharing mechanism. So how do we measure the success of these types of partnerships? Perhaps certain key performance indicators, KPIs, may be a useful tool. Looking at the number of documents that come out, the number of reports, is there an increase? The number of, and the quality, a more qualitative approach, the quality of things like SDRs, the outcome of investigations. And so overall, I think in measuring the true impact of partnerships, we can look at things like the number of suspect accounts identified, the number of investigations started, the number of arrests, convictions, how many victims have we identified, how much fraud have we prevented, and most importantly, what's the value of the assets that we have recovered, which we can link, all of this to partnerships. This is the true benefit of partnership, and here again, we would be achieving our shared objective of reducing financial crime. Now, in Jamaica, we have the basic legal framework that would support cooperation and collaboration amongst both domestic and international partners. Perfect example, of course, is the FID Act, which allows the CTD, with the approval of the minister, to enter into various arrangements for sharing information with either a local body or a foreign one. And to date, the FID has entered into such MOUs with at least 3 domestic ones and 20 international partners. So this is an example of where we do have the basic legislation that would support increased partnership. Partnership also takes the form of support from the legislation in the mutual legal assistance treaties, the Mutual Assistance in Criminal Matters Act. Also, we have a number of multilateral MOUs being entered into by our financial regulators, for instance. And this provides the basis for much of the partnership that goes on between regulators in the financial industry. And tax authorities have the benefit of double tax arrangements and other form of bilateral and multilateral tax treaties that provide for the sharing of information so that you can investigate various tax misconduct. But apart from that, membership in various entities. So Jamaica is a member in a number of regional and international organizations, including Interpol. We're a part of the Egmont Group, and recently the JOLT partnership. These are all examples of where membership in different types of organizations and networks can provide the basis for this type of partnership and collaboration and cooperation. But of course, it doesn't only have to be through formal mechanisms. We can partner through networking in more informal sort of settings. Very often, through police-to-police cooperation, information is investigated and exchanged, rather, between police and other law enforcement entities at an informal level. And so, if we were to participate in many of the expert working groups, for instance, those by Egmont and Interpol, we would increase the amount of networking that we have and provide a basis to partner and collaborate on a more informal level. Simple things: participating in CFATF plenaries, participating in specialized conferences that focus on financial crime, such as the Cambridge Symposium, ACAM seminars. All of these are opportunities to network and grow our partnership. And why is it that we need to network? Because we need to keep talking. We need to talk to each other, let people understand what it is that we want to achieve, help to convince them to share our common goal. Communication amongst all stakeholders is essential. We need to dispel myths, build trust, and overcome any reluctance to cooperate and collaborate. We talk about the legal profession. There was talk about them having, gotten this injunction so that they don't have to be a part of the regulated sector for the purpose of, providing SDRs and so on. One of the critical things that the legal profession is concerned about is their fear that there is an absence of data security. They feel that when they hand over these reports to the FID, it won't be safe. They're going to get identified, they're going to suffer retaliation. But how do you convince them? You need to sit with them. You need to talk. You need to dispel these myths, build trust. Because at the end of the day, trust is the cornerstone of any effective partnership. There needs to be clarity in the arrangements in relation to rights and obligations. You need to have a secure IT platform. You need to have a mechanism for securing data received and stored. That sort of trust is essential. And that is one of the challenges to partnerships. That, along with legal limits for data sharing, capacity constraints, and this culture of reticence that we see among certain potential partners. And so, one of the enablers that is critical to the success of any partnership is political support. So I'm happy to have the Honorable Minister here with us, and I heard the other Honorable Minister Clark this morning, both of whom we can tell are committed, right? Because without political support, we will not be able to overcome the challenges of having legislative changes done in an expeditious manner, completing MOUs, treaties without delay, and trying to overcome those capacity constraints by providing critical support, technical, financial, and human resources. And so we need it. We need political support. And so, here we are today. The events of the last few weeks have shown us, they said that out of evil comes good. So perhaps out of the evil of this significant fraud, the good is that the attention of those who are in government is now focused on this issue of financial crime. And as we heard the minister say this morning, no stone will be left unturned. And so perhaps now is the time for us, having received their attention, to get the kind of support we need to have those types of partnerships, that level of cooperation, collaboration, putting the systems in place that we can definitely have that shared objective of reducing financial crime and achieve those goals. But let's not do this in a rush. Let's go back to basics. Pause a little bit. Partner with everyone when we're thinking about what we need to do. No knee-jerk reactions. We need to put everybody at the table, make sure that in this law reform process, they all actively have a voice from the inception. Not just at the end at the Joint Select Committee, but even before you have a bill. Sit down, talk about it. What do we need to fix? We need to fix some basic things in our legislation. It's very, the media would latch on to something like, increased penalties, stiffer penalties, and so on for various offenses. But before we can look at that, we need to see if the legislation provides the proper mechanisms for investigating and prosecuting financial crime. I'll give an example from the Securities Act. Insider dealing, market manipulation. Have we ever had a prosecution for those? Is that not hearing? Well, why not? It's not that these are not provided for in the legislation, but if you had a look at the legislation, can't understand it, right? It is so badly drafted with respect to the draftsman, but it is complicated in an unnecessary way that it is almost impossible to identify what are the ingredients for this offense. So before we increase the penalty for insider dealing, we have to fix the Securities Act and ensure we can actually properly investigate and prosecute it. So I'm just suggesting, go back to basics, right? And ensure too that we have adequate resources that are put in place to ensure that when we adjust these laws, they can be properly enforced. Because I'm sure you'll all agree, we're very good, as Minister Malahufort said this morning, we're very good at passing legislation. But are we equally as good in enforcing them? And that's something we need to think about. And so we need to learn from the past. What are our mistakes? We need to know that we have to have enhanced partnership amongst regulators, law enforcement, private sector, and the general public. Let's not forget the general public. Recognize the limits of what we've been doing. Look beyond the legislative and enforcement framework. And I want us to also consider re-examining what is the jurisprudential basis of financial crime. Think about changing the culture so that instead of having this reticence, this reluctance to deal with financial crime, we have persons being individually and professionally responsible in action to counter financial crime. And so I want to share with you some thoughts about this. Most financial crimes fall within the definition of what is known as mala prohibita, which simply means it's prohibited by law. But what we have been seeing recently, like with fraud, where there is an identifiable victim, that is considered to be mala in se. In other words, it's bad in itself. Everybody agrees that fraud, when you see victims, and we've heard this over the last few weeks, everybody is shocked, disgusted, horrified. We have to do something about this. And so we will take that on. But what about things like insider dealing, market manipulation, tax evasion? Do people feel the same sense of opprobrium when this happens? Maybe not, because they just don't understand it. And so what we have to do in relation to these types of offenses is to convince people that these offenses are just as bad, they're just as egregious as those other forms of wrong that you're so horrified about, fraud, violent crimes, and everything. So we need to go back to the drawing board, and again, it comes back to talking, communication, let people know, get the message out there. And so I like to preach this about trying to change our collective consciousness. We see in society a general unwillingness or reticence to take action against the perpetrators of these types of mala prohibita offenses. This, of course, will undermine your ability to investigate and detect because you wouldn't get the support. You wouldn't get partnership. So how can you cooperate and collaborate? So how do we change the way people think? Through public education, letting them know the dangers that are posed to society from financial crime. We talked about the link between financial crime and organized crime. If we could get people to understand that these gangs are being funded by these types of financial crimes, and financial crime in the form of money laundering allows them to exist and then go on killing other people, then people will connect the dots and feel, oh, this is something wrong. This is something I need to be involved in preventing. So everyone has a responsibility. The media, law enforcement, regulators, civil society, we all have a part to play in changing the way people think, getting them on board. I feel like I'm preaching up here, but that is what we need to do. And so, partnership. Let me do a quick poll here. How many persons here are from the public sector? How many from the private sector? And how many would say other? Other as in academics, think tanks, NGOs. Well, you see, we're here in an environment where we can network and build partnerships. And so this type of event is important, right? It's a significant event in promoting partnership. And so if we change people's mindset, foster meaningful partnerships, and other important collaborative efforts, we can help to break that silo mentality that we spoke about at the beginning, which represents the greatest barrier for us achieving our common goal. We need to ensure that every individual, every sector in society accepts their own role and their own responsibility in the common pursuit, not only to reduce financial crime, but to reduce all types of criminal activity in Jamaica. And that way, we would have achieved our shared objective of reducing financial crime and making Jamaica a better place to live, work, and do business, raise families. So thank you.